Hi, welcome back for the third part of the trilogy with the wonderful Rick Osmon. If you haven't seen the other two, don't worry, start from here, maybe see the other two later or something. Because this is the really important one. And what we're looking at is what happens to evidence that does not fit the official timeline or the proclamation by Powell that there was no outside contact with America before Columbus. Because it's not just the European history and the Welsh migrations and the white stuff that we get accused of trying to promote. It's the Native American history gets absolutely hammered during this as well. Check out the story, what happened to the Nez Perce tribe. It's absolutely heartbreaking. You'll see something about it in here. If you need to look it up and see the full story, dreadful. And all their history, their stories, anything that didn't fit with the manifest destiny and the claim on the land had to go. It really is tragic. This is a huge tragedy. So please, I enjoy this chat with Rick.
You also very rarely come across a term called a problematic artifact or a problematic cultural remains. That's what we're talking about here. Now, I mentioned earlier...
That's the most wonderful, wonderful term. There's those two words, problematic artifact, you know? It's just great. That sums up everything, I think. I think that could be a title for a book.
Well, I have considered that one. Let me see if I can find a picture here real quick.
It's great, isn't it? It doesn't fit our narrative, so we're just going to have to ignore it or bury it or hide it or just pretend. What I usually find happens over this side of the pond anyway is that just ignore it, it'll go away eventually. You know, that's the best.
Yeah. What you mean, like the history of Wales?
Yeah, that's right. Just pretend it. Just don't argue with the people. Just ignore it. Yeah.
I showed you this graphic earlier. This is Grave Creek.
Yes.
Moundsville, West Virginia. Found in that mound. That mound was 78 feet tall. Had two tombs in it. The upper tomb had one body. The lower tomb had two. Presumably, that's a reflection of a different time period. The two bodies had shell beads and a couple gorgeous and some copper bracelets. No, they didn't have any copper in that one. The upper tomb had two copper bracelets, some very fine gorgets, 240 pieces of mica, 565 carved beads, shell beads, and a cape that may have had several thousand shell beads on it originally, but most of them had melted into the soil. The body was 7 foot 4 inches in height, and underneath his skull was a small carved tablet. Let's see if I can get that graphic on here.
Yep, I can see it. Yeah, hold it still. Yeah. I think I've seen that somewhere.
It's called the Grave Creek Tablet.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's in King Arthur Conspiracy book, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it is. And it's unexplained. It's a problematic artifact. There were several of those, particularly associated with mounds, that they're denied, they're downtrodden.
Lee was explaining to me how some of the discoverers of these problematic artifacts get really rough treatment, don't they?
They're persecuted beyond belief. Yeah. In this case, the guy who reported it first in the literature, his name was Henry Rose Schoolcraft. His wife was Ojibwa. He could speak, I believe it was 27 different dialects of Native American languages, and she was at like 47. So they could research together and did for a lifetime.
Yes, and Alan mentions Schoolcraft quite a bit in his writing. Yeah.
Yep. So he found what he thought was an Iberian script that matched it, and he translated it as this. I don't know the quote off the top of my head, but basically the wife had it carved in memory of the husband who basically owned everything that you could see from that mountaintop, which was 17 others. And then there's a little map on the stone itself. You also had at least a half a dozen other burial mounds that had problematic stuff in them. from about the same period, but not necessarily from the same place. For instance, there was a very pre-Hebraic stone.
Sorry, a very what? Sorry,
pre-Hebraic, ancient Hebrew.
Pre-Hebraic, right? Oh, with you. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Tablet. There was one that was called a Decalogue stone, and it was the Ten Commandments with a slightly different alphabet from current Hebraic. Lots of those, and yet they're all ignored. At best, they're ignored. Mostly, they're just decried, and their discoverers persecuted, and their supporters are persecuted as well. So that's what my research has led me to, is finding some answers for that. What did they trade across the pond? Great question. Why would anybody sail here to get whatever it was they got? I found a few maybes, but I don't have a lot of definites.
Okay, well, we got copper, haven't we? It seems to be a lot big demand for the copper, wasn't it? That was a definite.
Yep. So what was traded for the copper? What
was going the other way? Yeah, that's a good question. Yes.
Yeah. If it was to the Romans, where are all the amphora? Because they drank wine. They did. And Brazil, there's a bay in Brazil, had a rumored 18 different amphora on the bottom. Yes. And they were all covered up by the Navy down there, the Brazilian Navy.
David Brody mentioned a few of these things as well. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And the Decalogue stone and things. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all part of the same picture.
Because something you mentioned earlier, which I think is vastly underrated, is the importance of the containers. And one of the things you mentioned there about like Coca-Cola bottles going around, because what's happened in Europe, I know you're aware of this. You get this because the same container occurs in different places. Therefore, they're all part of the same civilization, like Beaker civilization or whatever it is. They don't.
Bell Beaker people, yeah.
They always try to look what's inside the container. Actually, it's the containers, the big clue quite often, isn't it? Different shapes, different goods, and different purposes.
Right, because you can't pour wine out of the same container that you pour grain out of, or flour, or...
Yeah, and salt is another one. It has a special type of container to keep it in good condition and things like that.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and like going across the Sahara, you don't need a container at all. But you get within 20 miles of the seacoast, and you got to have something that keeps the moisture out of your salt, or it just alternates the moisture.
So have you found? So what sort of evidence have you followed then to try and work out what was coming the other way?
Well, I followed the clue of what happened to the amphora. Right. Just like we might say we might reuse a plastic milk jug as a container for something else. That's what I think they did with the amphora. And in one case, I'm pretty sure that they took those amphora up the Mississippi, up the Ohio, up the Allegheny River into northwestern Pennsylvania, and they refilled them with sweet Western Pennsylvania crude oil, took it back to Rome and used it as an emollient. They used it as possibly Greek fire. They used it as lubricants. They used it as a whole bunch of stuff because it's near perfect right as it comes out of the ground for those things. You can refine it into gasoline, but it's more expensive to refine because it's too young as crude oil. But it's perfect for those things. Okay. And it just comes up out of the ground. You don't have to drill or pressurize or pump or anything. You just dip it out of a pit. And that's what I think they did with those amphora.
So they come back again. They bring the goods over, refill them, and send them back.
Right.
That makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and you can refill them as wine jugs, but it leaves it
so good the second or third time.
Yeah, right.
Well, as if Jack Daniels uses old barrels, doesn't it? Or Scotch wrong way around. Yeah. Scotch whiskey uses old Jack Daniels barrels. That's right.
Yes, that's right.
Around. That's it. Yeah.
But there are other incidences of not just containers that are out of place. For instance, there's a ground stone, I would have to call it a powder box, like a lady's makeup box.
Okay.
Stone lid on a stone cup, and it came from a mound in western Tennessee, and it is very, very second century Roman in design. It's another problematic artifact.
Yeah.
You have one in Mexico. Histrov Romero, I believe is the archaeologist's name. He came up with a head off of a statue. It's just a head off a statue. And it's a very second century Hebraic Roman. In this case, it'd be a Jerusalem functionary of the Roman government. It was underneath the floor of an Aztec house from the 1450s.
Wow. So how does that get there? Yeah.
Yeah.
How does that get there?
So, yeah, there are a lot of out-of-place artifacts like that. You don't see the coverage of them that they deserve, for one thing. Another instance, this one is kind of in between. At Angel Mounds, right along the Ohio River, just almost due south of me. Before it was illegal, there was a guy out there who was pot hunting, and he would use a metal rod to probe into the mound. If he hit something harder, he'd stop, he'd dig down to it. He knew how far to dig because he knew how far the rod was in the ground. In March of 1970, I think, is either 69 or 70, he dug up a metal breastplate. It was a Spanish conquistador breastplate in Indiana where none of them had ever been. According to their own chronicles, they never made it this far. So I'm writing a presentation about that right now. And
is that still around though? Because that's the problem. There was some other breastplates with the harp on and stuff, and all these things disappeared, don't they?
Yes, they did.
Is the breastplate, the Spanish breastplate, still around? Has that disappeared as well, or is it?
No, he found a market for that thing right away.
So that's still in existence. Then it's still.
Presumably, it's in someone's collection, or it was bought to be destroyed. I don't know. I doubt that second one because it's historic era. It's just out of place.
Right. So it's not right. Okay. It's not breaking this sort of 1492 rule kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, whether it was Ponce de Leon in 1521 or Hernando de Soto in 39 to 42. Yeah, either one of those is illegal under the whole Columbus first thing.
Possibly the busiest guys in history, those two.
Yes.
They managed to put artifacts all over the continent.
Yeah, right.
It's always one of those two, isn't it?
While they were looking for the Fountain of Youth.
Yeah, they covered thousands and thousands of miles. An amazing achievement.
They did. And both of them were filthy rich when they started these adventures, looking for more riches. So what could possibly entice them to give up all that they had and go out in the bush again?
And trudging along riverbanks and through forests and risking their life. I mean, the mileages, you put it all together, I mean, and I've never worked it out, but it's many thousands of miles. It's supposed to be done by foot or on a pony or something.
Correct, yeah. So they supposedly introduced both hogs and horses to eastern North America. My paper says they did not introduce hogs. Well, they might have reintroduced them after they were wiped out, but they did not make the first introduction.
I'd be interested to see that sometime, yeah, because I know with you mentioned horses, and I've seen a few things saying that horses must have been there before.
Particularly in the western part of what is now the United States, yes. There's one incident in Wisconsin where a small horse was dug up out of a mound, and the state archaeologists quickly shut down the entire dig because, well, that's got to be intrusive. That's got to be there were no horses. Now, right on top of that horse skeleton was a stone axe with a wooden handle that could be dated. In the 1950s, they didn't automatically date everything, but that particular axe handle in the late 1960s was dated at 940 AD, plus or minus 20, 30 years.
And that's on top of the horse, yeah? So
on top of the horse, that's right.
The horse must be older, yeah.
And given the size of the horse as it was reported, it could very easily have been a Norwegian fjord pony, which would have made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, out west, you had I don't know how much you know about Native American history in the Western United States, but there's a tribe we call the Nez Perce. That's not what they call themselves.
The Nez Perce.
Yes.
I haven't heard of those, no.
Okay. They were one of the tribes encountered by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark as they went west to basically lay claim to all of the continent that they could. And of course, that was 100 years before this incident happened. But later on, one of the chiefs, they had civil chiefs and they had war chiefs. The civil chief was named Chief Joseph. He had a Christian name assigned to him.
Joseph?
Yes, Chief Joseph.
Okay.
And he was not a war chief, but when the army came trying to herd them onto a reservation, he took on the role of a war chief, while the real warriors took the men and women and children who were not warriors across the Canadian border. He ran a diversion tactic to get the U.S. Army off the track of the main body of the tribe very successfully. He was captured, and in his possession, one of the things in his possession was a small fired clay tablet, an inch on a side. It was written in ancient Sumerian cuneiform, and it was a receipt for one sheep. How
has that got there? Yeah.
Yeah, and when he was asked, he said, I passed down through my family for many, many generations. Said, no kidding. But that tribe already had horses when the French got there, when the Spanish got there, and when Lewis and Clark got there.
Yes.
And those horses are called Appaloosas, and they have a genetic.
I've heard of Appaloosa horses, yeah. I used to paint, yeah. Very distinctive body markings they have, don't they?
Right, and beyond that, they have a very distinctive DNA set that would only be achieved by breeding for about 1,000 years away from other populations of horses. So you have that. Then we're going to add in one more factor. About 1,000 years ago, the Plains natives, the nomadic Plains natives, that was not the Nez Perce because they kept villages, they changed the way they built their teepees and the way they hauled them. We know that because of the size that they changed. They changed from a small one, 850 to 900 AD, to a larger one at about that time. A larger one, the poles of which would have been too big for their dogs to travoy. They had to have a horse to travoy something that big.
Right. So the literally more horsepower meant you could have larger objects.
Yes, and this stumps all the archaeologists. How did that happen? How did they do this? How did they didn't have horses. How did this happen? Well, apparently they did have horses. If you find some Roman horseshoes, then we'll have a real problem. Or bits, by the way, because there have been a couple.
This happens a lot, doesn't it? You have these situations where these early historians working with hardly any evidence or anything come up with an idea. And then you just drift around long enough, and that becomes then the absolute truth. It happens in so many subjects. And you think, well, the guy who was doing this, for one, the subject wasn't established. He's having to make it up as he goes along, pretty much. And for two, we didn't have all the evidence we've got now. So surely we've got a right to challenge those old positions based on improved knowledge and education.
Well, that's scientific method, and that is foreign to archaeology. I'm just saying. And if you ask a retired archaeologist, they'll say, no, that's not science. This is humanities. This is feel good on the inside stuff. If we wanted to prove something, we'd have to do scientific method. And we can't do that in archaeology because as soon as you dig that object up out of the ground, you've changed everything. You can't duplicate the experiment. It's going to be it's going to be a different object.
This is where Wilson and Blackett come in, isn't it? Because they do try an industrial method, they call it, or a scientific method. Get your evidence and see where it takes you. I mean, that does seem more logical, doesn't it, really?
Rather than say, this is what we're going to believe. Yes. And this is the stuff you have to ignore to support that idea. And that part was born with a guy, and
is this Powell now?
Yes.
Yeah. Was it Sidney Powell or Powell anyway? Powell.
Major John Wesley Powell.
That's it, John Wesley Powell. That's it.
He was a major in the United States Army. He lost an arm at Shiloh in 1864 4 or 5, whatever date that battle was. And subsequently in 1868, he got in a canoe and then a pirogue boat, and he navigated the Colorado River. This is through the Grand Canyon. This is some of the roughest white water in this continent.
The guy was a hero, yeah.
Yeah, but that's the point. He became what I call a cookie cutter hero. He was put in that position so that he could get all the accolades he needed to do the job they needed him to do. And for a period of, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, he was dual-hatted. He was both the director, he was the second director of the USGS, United States Geophysical Survey. This was during the growth period of all the railroads, incidentally. And he got to tell them where to put their rail beds. At the same time, he proposed, established, and headed what he called the Bureau of Ethnography or Ethnology at the Smithsonian Institution. Thank you, Mr. Smithson. I know you're Brit. So he knew where the archaeology was, and he knew where the rail beds needed to go, and he could obliterate one with the other. And I've found at least 4 different instances where he did exactly that.
What, he directed the railroads to get rid of evidence, you think?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. That's something that is remarkable. So I'm also right to say, I want to come back to this. This is really important, but just quickly, is it? I mean, am I right? I don't know much about Powell, but I don't think he had much formal education or qualifications in these particular fields, did he?
He never had a college degree of any kind.
Right. Okay. So
yeah, I take that back. He had an honorary from a foreign country, but
yeah, not an academic qualification. No, yeah.
Right.
So what you're saying, then, he would direct the railroads where he'd hopefully want to avoid places, but.
Well, today we would. We have watchdogs to help that happen. Yeah. But in that day and age, manifest destiny ruled everything, especially those things that could draw into question your right to sovereignty. You know, if let's say, for instance, that a site, a Native American site, had what was very clearly a Christian cross carved into a rock. What would you do? Well, in that case, they'd blow up that rock to make fill for the rail bed.
Wow. Wow. Makes perfect sense, yeah.
So it happened. The obliteration was not complete in all the places. Powell probably never saw any of them himself. He was taking correspondence from other field agents. And from the railroads where they needed the lines to go. And you'd say, okay, well, this creek bed, oh, by the way, it has some cliff writing right here. Yeah, you're going to go along that side. You're going to have to clear out 10 feet of the cliff to make a rail bed. Perfect. Here you go. Here's your papers.
I'm shocked. I'm also shocked I never thought of this. I've been struggling, especially the last few weeks, I've been talking a lot about this kind of subject, to work out what was driving all this, and how did it happen? And that's just quite disturbing, isn't it? What people are prepared to do in these situations. Very disturbing.
Well, we could go into current events, but
yeah, let's not go there yet.
Yeah, maybe later.
The world we live in, I guess, shut down or something. Yeah, but
yeah,
that's so. Do you know the story behind him? How he got to make his pronouncement, and how that became such an unshakable statement? That nothing was before Columbus, basically, or however he put it.
That's a good paraphrase, as good as it's going to get. How he got to have that power is he understood, or he was instilled with the knowledge that whatever's in the literature is what science will go by. Science doesn't go and do its original stuff very often. It's drawing on other people's knowledge, right or wrong. It's the starting point. And in his case, it's still the starting point. So he wrote prolifically, or actually he signed it. Other people wrote most of it.
Right.
He was the ultimate bureaucrat. The bureaucracy is a self-replicating organization. It is alive in its own sense, and it has to have a dogma on which it is based for that existence to continue. In the case of the Smithsonian Institution, if they were wrong once, they can be wrong again. Oh, wait, let's see. We've got, let me tick off a few. We've got giants. We've got ancient tablets. We've got ancient skeletons that don't even look human. We've got little bitty people. I'm talking 19 inches tall, adults, 40, 50 years old.
Yeah, yeah. All that Egyptian stuff from the Grand Canyon I heard about.
Yeah, yeah. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of similar stories. I don't know how many are true. But when you go back and you compare it to newspaper clippings, which I've come to learn fake news has a long history of its own, that the Smithsonian and sometimes the newspapers were in league to cover up stuff. If they started out at odds about covering up stuff, the newspapers usually came around. San Francisco Chronicle being the one that comes to mind the most, particularly with the Egyptian stuff in the Grand Canyon. They said the initial story, I forget what the major's name was now, said, and he's going back in 2 weeks. It already has the rail tickets involved and all this. And we'll do a follow-up immediately. They never did that follow-up. Read into it what you wish. And all the newspaper clippings, and the giant skeleton was sent to the institution by so-and-so and so-and-so. And you can look up and you can find those people's names, but you can never find that skeleton at the Smithsonian. And then you get the stories. Oh yeah, a whole barge loads of skeletons being thrown out into the ocean, past the continental bluff. By the way,
I'll say the Smithsonian, where evidence goes to die.
Yeah, pretty much. Or it's kind of like NASA, never a straight answer.
We're definitely not going there.
I have my own opinions, but
yeah, me too. Yeah, but there we go. And anyway, let's not go there. We'll do it another time. We'll have a separate chat about NASA and what really goes on there. Well, brilliant. I tell you what, I think we have to. I think we've covered a lot today, haven't we? Can we talk again? I've absolutely loved this. You've got a lot of this information. I want to sort of let it mellow a while and think about it, and come back, because it's just on a vast scale. Then, really.
Yes, it is, and that's one of the biggest problems, is getting people particularly people in position, to understand that the people who were here 1,000, 2,000, even 5,000 years ago were sophisticated and they were social. They weren't isolated little bands living in huts, if at all, in living in a structure at all. No, they were city dwellers. They were, we may not find the evidence of their farming, but we know that they did. We know that they did aquaculture. We know you can look at their bones. If you can find it, you can't even touch their bones nowadays because of the laws. But if you could run the test for strontium content and all that stuff, you could find out, oh, he was born here, but he died here 1,500 miles away. We got the Kennewick man. Well, we used to have the Kennewick man. He's now buried in a secret location. But those are
and I think another major point, which we didn't talk about specifically, but you've alluded to, is this idea that rivers and seas were obstacles, whereas in fact they were the highways, weren't they? That was the easiest way to travel, is in a boat, much easier than hacking through a jungle or a forest or something.
Right. And you find the remnants of those boats in just about every waterway on the continent. Finding cargoes would be a whole different thing.
Excellent. All right. Well, I really hope we can come back and do this, continue this very soon. That's been.
I'll look forward to that, Ross.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Thank you. I think I have to. I don't know how I'm going to put this out in little pieces. Perhaps it's so much. It's enormous. And I will talk about that book as well. Let's get that book available again. That'll be good.
That'll work. It's entitled "The Graves of the Golden Bear: Ancient Fortresses and Monuments of the Ohio Valley."
Excellent.
And it is available on eBay and Amazon as a used edition, but as you noted, it's far more than the cover price was.
Yeah, you become collectible, Rick. You become collectible. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to the next time. And
Me too, Russ. Thank you very
care.
much.
Thank you.
I will.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Well, a massive thank you to Rick there. Absolutely brilliant. Really got me thinking about the whole context and politics and how this massive cover-up can happen. So we've got loads more American history, British, New Zealand, Australian, various other places. A live show every Sunday, 8 o'clock UK time. We speak to lots of other writers like Alan Wilson, Rick you just heard from. And then we go exploring, which is great fun, out into the caves, up onto the hills, look at the ancient stones. There's megalithic walls in Wales being destroyed deliberately by councils. What's that about? Why is it the Welsh language goes all the way back to ancient times, and you can read Babylonian hieroglyphs, all sorts, and it breaks down to Welsh. It's a fascinating subject. It's only hidden at the moment. It's not yet lost or destroyed. We can still save it. We don't get any funding or grants for this, of course, so any help's appreciated. There's books for sales. There's great things you can get hold of, and music and DVDs. And become a Patreon fan. So until next time, peace, which is Heddwch.